Hi, 32M. Need to get this out because every person in my life is either calling me a genius or saying I went too far. I don't care either way. I know what I did and I'd do it again tomorrow. I married Carol, 30F, 4 years ago, together since college. Her family has money, not wealthy, but comfortable. Her dad, Clive, ran a small chain of dry cleaning spots. Her mom, Naomi, did the books. Carol grew up never fixing anything herself. When we got married, that job became mine. I didn't mind at first because I'm handy. My dad taught me everything before he passed when I was 22. But there's a gap between your partner appreciating you and your partner thinking you're the help. About 2 years and Carol's friend Alyssa started this whole comparing husbands thing in their group chat. Who drove what? Whose husband took them on better vacations? Carol never told me directly, but I started catching the comments. Little digs about how Alyssa's boyfriend, Daryl, got courtside seats while I suggested a camping trip for our anniversary. I told her I didn't appreciate being compared, and she said I was being sensitive, that it was just girl talk. Then came January mid-winter. I'd been fighting a bad flu for 3 days. Fever around 102. Our upstairs toilet started overflowing at 1:45 a.m. on a Thursday. Water everywhere. Carol stood in the hallway yelling that water was coming under the door. She didn't grab towels, didn't touch the valve, just told me to fix it. So, I got on my knees on that wet tile, shivering and coughing, and started working. What I didn't know was Carol had her phone out recording the whole time. 4 minutes of me on the floor looking destroyed. She sent it to the group chat with something like, "Ladies meet, my pathetic excuse for a husband. Can't even afford a plumber. Look how he crawls around like a desperate cockroach." Then she posted a clip on Instagram with the caption, "This is what rock bottom looks like." Her friends left rows of laughing emojis. I didn't find out until that Friday. My buddy Justin texted me that Carol had posted a video of me and it looked bad. Alyssa had shown him the whole group chat thread at a get-together thinking it was hilarious. Justin screenshotted everything and sent it to me. I sat in my truck in a hardware store parking lot reading those messages for 40 minutes. Carol had added more comments after the video about how I was too cheap to call professionals, how she was embarrassed because I'd installed our kitchen faucet slightly crooked. One friend asked why she was still with me. And Carol said something about how at least I was useful around the house. Like a living handyman, she didn't have to pay. I went home that night and told Carol I'd seen everything. The messages, the story, the cockroach line, all of it. She told me I was overreacting. Said all wives talk about their husbands like that. She said Daryl gets roasted worse and doesn't cry about it. Then she got mad at me for looking at her social media and said I had trust issues. We fought for 2 hours and she never apologized once. She kept saying if I made more money, she wouldn't have anything to vent about. That was the night I made my decision not to leave. Not yet. I had something forming and I needed time. What Carol didn't realize was that our house was in my name only. Her dad, Clive, had insisted Carol's name stay off the deed because she had student loan issues and he didn't want liens on the property. I'd been paying every mortgage payment for 4 years solo. Carol paid groceries and her car. Nothing toward the house. And we live in a separate property state. I spent the next 2 weeks acting normal. Went to work, came home, fixed the leaky downstairs sink, replaced weather stripping on the back door. Meanwhile, Carol kept posting to her group chat. I had access now because Justin was feeding me screenshots through Alyssa, who had no clue Justin and I were tight. Carol recorded me cleaning gutters and posted it with the caption, "Free labor still." 2 weeks of watching her mock me while I smiled and cooked dinner. 2 weeks while I quietly met with a lawyer. Organized every document and confirmed that everything I was planning was completely legal. Then I pulled the trigger on all of it at once. I'll get into exactly what I did in the update because I need to explain what happened with Clive and Naomi first. That whole situation turned into its own separate disaster that I wasn't expecting, and it changed how everything played out. I need everybody to understand something about the 2 weeks this man spent acting normal. That is a special kind of discipline. Most people, most human beings, when you show them someone calling them a cockroach while they're literally saving the house from flood damage with 102 fever, they explode. They yell. They leave that night. They send a paragraph text at 3 a.m. that they regret by sunrise. This man went home and replaced weather stripping on the back door. He cooked dinner. He smiled. That is not a man who snapped. That is a man who drew up a blueprint. She was still posting him cleaning gutters with free labor, while he was building the legal case that would remove her from the property. She was generating evidence against herself in real time and thought she was being funny. And the part that makes my stomach turn isn't the cockroach line. It's at least he's useful around the house like a living handyman she didn't have to pay. Because that tells you this wasn't venting. This wasn't a bad night. That is how Carol genuinely categorized this man in her life. He wasn't her partner. He was a subscription service bundled in with the marriage. She reduced a man whose father taught him these skills before he died. Which makes every single thing he builds an act of love and legacy. She reduced all of that to free labor. That's not venting. That's contempt. And contempt is the one thing you cannot come back from in a relationship because it means you've stopped seeing the other person as your equal. And then she had the nerve to say, if you made more money, I wouldn't have anything to vent about. She told him to his face during the confrontation where she was supposed to be apologizing that his value as a husband was determined by his tax bracket. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She basically handed him a performance review during an argument about her cruelty and gave him a failing grade on income. And the all wives talk about their husbands like that defense. No, healthy couples might joke about quirks. They don't film each other sick on the floor and workshop insect comparisons for Instagram engagement. There is a universe of difference between my husband leaves socks everywhere. And look at this pathetic cockroach crawling around because he can't afford a plumber. Update 1. Alright, so a lot of you asked what I actually did and what happened with Carol's parents. Both things are connected in a way I didn't plan for. After 2 weeks of acting normal, I filed for divorce on a Monday. Same day, my lawyer sent Carol a formal notice that she had 30 days to vacate my property. Not our property, the house solely in my name. Every mortgage payment from my account for 4 years. Separate property state. Carol had zero legal claim and my lawyer confirmed it twice. I handed her the papers when she got home that evening. She was carrying takeout in her gym bag. I was sitting at the kitchen table with everything spread out. I told her she was being served divorce papers and a 30-day notice to vacate. She stared at the paperwork, then asked if I was joking. I told her to read the documents. She picked up the notice first, and when she saw the lawyer's letterhead, she started going off about how her dad paid the down payment, so it was partially her family's house. I told her the down payment was a gift with no written agreement. Her name was never on the deed, and she'd contributed nothing to the mortgage. We went back and forth for over an hour. Carol kept switching between fury and negotiation. She said I couldn't throw her out after 4 years. I told her 30 days was more courtesy than she deserved. She said this was about the video and I was blowing it out of proportion. I told her this was about years of disrespect and calling me a cockroach to her friends while I fixed her house sick at 2 a.m. was the last thing she'd ever take from me. Then she called Clive. He showed up within an hour still in work clothes talking about how I needed to calm down. He went on about how he'd put $30,000 toward that down payment and wasn't going to watch me use his money to kick out his daughter. I told him the money was a gift with no promissory note, no equity agreement, nothing giving him or Carol ownership interest. He said family doesn't operate on legal technicalities. I told him maybe his daughter should have thought about that before recording me sick on the floor and calling me a cockroach online. Clive didn't know about the video. Carol never told her parents. When I showed him the screenshots, the group chat messages, the Instagram caption, the laughing emojis, his whole approach shifted. He stopped talking about the down payment and started asking Carol to explain herself. Carol was furious I'd shown her dad and kept saying it was private. Clive told her posting on Instagram made it the opposite of private. Carol tried redirecting to the house, saying none of this justified evicting her. Clive agreed with that and offered to mediate. I said no. I told him for 2 years his daughter treated me like hired help, mocked me to her friends, and the house I maintained and paid for was not going to be her comfort zone while she figured out her next move. Naomi called an hour after Clive left. More aggressive. She told me no decent man puts his wife on the street over a stupid video. I told her it wasn't stupid. It was her daughter filming me sick while doing something Carol couldn't do herself, then broadcasting it for laughs. Naomi said Carol had always been dramatic and I should have known what I signed up for. I told her that was interesting because it sounded like she was admitting Carol had always been this way and everyone expected me to just take it. She told me I'd regret this and Clive would get a lawyer. I told her the deed had one name on it. Now, here's what I didn't expect. Carol told Alyssa everything and Alyssa started posting indirect stuff on her Instagram about how some men can't handle strong women and use financial control to punish their wives. She didn't name me, but our whole circle knew. Daryl messaged me asking what was going on. I sent him the screenshots. He went quiet for 2 days. Carol was still in the house during her 30-day window and wasn't packing, wasn't hunting, wasn't doing anything. She was banking on Clive's lawyer, blocking the eviction. I knew that wouldn't work legally, but I knew it would drag things out. Then something happened with Daryl and Alyssa that threw everything sideways, and it's directly connected to what Carol did next. I'll cover that in the next update. I want to talk about Naomi because she said something that completely gave the game away and didn't even realize it. Carol has always been dramatic and you should have known what you signed up for. Ma'am, do you hear yourself? You just said out loud to the man your daughter publicly humiliated that your family's official position is that Carol has always been like this and the expectation was that he would just absorb it forever without complaint. That's not a defense of your daughter. That's a confession that you raised someone to believe consequences are for other people. You're telling him, yeah, she's always been cruel, but you were supposed to be okay with that. And not understanding why that makes everything worse. And then Alyssa, the woman who was in that same group chat calling her own boyfriend a walking ATM, comparing him to some gym dude. This woman is posting about strong women and financial control. She doesn't care about financial abuse. She cares that the ecosystem where these women could trash their partners without consequences just got shattered. And now she's rebranding the fallout as feminism. Calling a sick man a cockroach while he fixes your plumbing at 2 a.m. is not girl power. Posting free labor all over a video of your husband doing home maintenance that directly benefits you is not empowerment. Wrapping all that in the language of strong women when someone finally pushes back is an insult to every woman who actually had to fight for something real. And the Clive moment when he saw those screenshots and shifted from, "Give me my 30,000, to Carol, explain yourself. That was real. For 30 seconds, Clive actually showed up as a father. He saw what his daughter did and his instinct was to hold her accountable. The moral compass flickered on, but then Naomi called, and Naomi doesn't do accountability. Naomi does damage control. Within an hour, Clive was back in formation, threatening lawyers. That family runs on one rule: protect Carol from the results of being Carol, no matter who gets hurt, no matter how clear the evidence is. And for 4 years, this man was the shock absorber for that entire family's dysfunction. Also, Carol not packing during the 30-day window, not apartment hunting, not doing anything, that tells you everything. She genuinely believed that if she just refused to comply, reality would bend around her. That is the behavior of someone who has never faced a situation daddy couldn't fix with a phone call. Update 2. So, remember how I sent Daryl the screenshots and he went quiet? Here's what happened. Daryl went through Alyssa's phone that night and found the full group chat history, not just the stuff about me. The whole thing going back months. Turns out Alyssa had been roasting Daryl in that same chat just as hard, calling him boring. Saying he was only good for his wallet, comparing him unfavorably to some guy at her gym. Daryl confronted Alyssa about it, and they had a massive blowout. Alyssa figured out that the only way Daryl could have seen those messages was through me. So, she called Carol screaming about how I was ruining everyone's relationships, and Carol needed to control her husband. This matters because Carol now had ammunition. She came at me that same night saying I wasn't just destroying our marriage. I was actively going around sabotaging her friendships and other people's relationships, too. She said I was on some kind of revenge campaign and that she'd make sure Clive's lawyer brought that up. I told her I didn't sabotage anything. I showed a man what his girlfriend was saying about him behind his back the same way Justin showed me. She didn't have a response to that, but she pivoted fast. Said I was trying to isolate her from her support system so she'd have nobody when the eviction hit. Now, here's where Clive gets involved again. And this part still makes me angry. Clive came to the house about a week after the first visit, but this time he didn't come to argue about the down payment. He came with a different angle. He sat at my kitchen table and told me that if I went through with the eviction and the divorce, he'd make sure Carol pursued alimony aggressively and that he'd personally fund whatever legal battle it took. He said he knew people and he could make this very expensive for me. Then he said something that told me everything I needed to know about why Carol is the way she is. He said I should be grateful his family even accepted me because when Carol first brought me home, he told Naomi that Carol was settling for a guy who worked with his hands and would never give her the life she was used to. So there it was. The reason Carol treated me like the help was because her own father saw me as beneath them from day one. Carol grew up hearing that. Naomi enabled it. And for 4 years, they all smiled at me at holiday dinners while privately thinking I was the budget option their daughter settled for. I told Clive I appreciated him finally being honest about how he really felt and that it actually made what I was doing easier. He asked what I meant. I told him that the house he'd helped with the down payment on, the one his daughter was about to lose access to, was worth about $140,000 more than when I bought it. And that increase was because of me. The floors I installed, the deck I rebuilt, the bathroom I renovated, the landscaping I did myself. Every single improvement that raised that property value came from my hands. The same hands he thought weren't good enough for his daughter. I told him his $30,000 gift had turned into equity he'd never see a cent of. And his daughter was going to walk away from this marriage with nothing from that house because he was the one who insisted her name stay off the deed. Clive left without saying much after that. But Naomi wasn't done. She started reaching out to my mom. My mom lives about 2 hours away and mostly stays out of my business. But Naomi found her on social media and started messaging her, telling her that I was being cruel, that I was putting Carol on the street, that I'd changed into someone cold. My mom called me about it and I explained the whole situation, showed her the screenshots. My mom's response was that if my dad were alive, he would have handled it the same way, and that she raised me to not let anyone disrespect me in my own home. She told Naomi to stop contacting her. Meanwhile, the 30-day clock was ticking and Carol started getting desperate. She couldn't afford an apartment on her salary alone, at least not anything comparable to the house. Alyssa wasn't speaking to her anymore because of the Daryl situation. Her parents were scrambling with the lawyer angle, but the consultations kept coming back with the same answer. The deed was clean, and I had every right to ask her to leave. Carol tried one more time to talk me into letting her stay. Said she'd delete the videos, apologize publicly, whatever I wanted. I told her the time for apologies was 2 months ago when I showed her the screenshots and she called me sensitive. Day 28 of the 30-day notice. Carol still hadn't packed a single box. And then Clive did something that I genuinely wasn't ready for and it changed the entire game. I'll explain in the final update because what he did directly connects to why Carol called me 13 times. Clive sat at this man's kitchen table, a table in a kitchen this man probably renovated himself, and told him he should be grateful the family accepted him. A man who for 4 years built a deck, renovated a bathroom, installed floors, did landscaping, replaced faucets, cleaned gutters, fixed plumbing at 2 a.m. with a fever. Clive looked at all of that and said, "You work with your hands. You were never good enough." And I need to point out something nobody's talking about. Clive runs dry cleaning shops. We're not talking about a man in a corner office at Goldman Sachs. This is a guy who built a comfortable life off pressing other people's clothes, which is fine. That's honest work. But the hypocrisy of looking down on someone else's honest labor while your entire livelihood is a service industry is staggering. $30,000. And he thinks he's funding a royal dowry. Clive is cosplaying his old money with dry cleaning revenue and a 2-bedroom condo. But when this man told Clive that the $140K in equity came from his hands, the same hands Clive said weren't good enough. That wasn't a rehearsed mic drop. That was a man finally putting a price tag on 4 years of being tolerated. 4 years of holiday dinners where they passed him the potatoes while privately thinking he was beneath their daughter. Every handshake from Clive, every welcome to the family, all performance. And now Clive had handed him the missing puzzle piece himself. Of course, Carol called him a cockroach. Of course, she saw him as the help. She was raised to see him that way. Clive programmed that perspective into her from day one. And Naomi going after his mom, finding her on social media, messaging a woman she barely knows to call her son cruel and cold. Her whole strategy has been to find someone else to pressure because she can't pressure this man directly. Guilting didn't work. Threatening lawyers didn't work. So now she's trying to get his mother to do the emotional labor she can't pull off herself. And his mom's response was perfect. If his dad were alive, he would have handled it the same way because his dad taught him to build things with his hands and to have a spine. Carol's family taught her that other people exist to serve you, and if they stop, you call daddy. And Carol offering to delete videos and apologize publicly. Now she wants to negotiate. She had a chance to apologize when it was free. 2 months ago, she could have said, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again." Instead, she said he was sensitive. Told him he was overreacting. Told him if he made more money she'd have nothing to vent about. The apology was free then. Now it costs her a house, her friendships, her dignity, and her living situation. And suddenly she found the words. Remorse always arrives right on schedule when the invoice does. Final update, day 28. Clive showed up at the house while I was at work and helped Carol change the locks. I came home to a new deadbolt on my own front door. My house, my name on the deed, and this man put new locks on it for his daughter. Like it belonged to them. Carol texted me saying she wasn't leaving and that if I wanted to remove her, I'd have to go through the courts, which would take months. She added that Clive's lawyer told them possession counts for a lot, and that dragging it out would pressure me into settling. I sat in my truck for about 10 minutes. Then I called my lawyer. He told me what Clive did was illegal since you can't change the locks on a property you don't own to keep the owner out, and I could call the police for an unlawful lockout. So, that's exactly what I did. 2 officers came out. I showed them the deed, the notice to vacate, my ID matching the address. They told Carol she had to let me in and that changing locks on someone else's property was a problem. Carol was arguing with the officers, saying she was a resident and had rights. They told her she could sort that out in court, but she couldn't lock the homeowner out of his own house. They made her give me the new keys. I walked back into my own house, and Carol was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, telling me I was going to pay for embarrassing her in front of the police. I told her she had 2 days left on the notice, and if she wasn't out, I'd file a formal eviction, which would go on her record. She said Clive would fight it. I said Clive just committed an illegal lockout on camera because the officers had body cams, and if he wanted to keep escalating, I'd include that in the filing. Carol didn't sleep at the house that night. She went to Naomi and Clive's place, but she left all her stuff. Everything's still unpacked, like she was making a statement that she wasn't really leaving. Day 30 came and she wasn't out. I filed the formal eviction that morning. Now, here's where the 13 calls come in and why this all connects back to the beginning. The eviction filing meant Carol now had a court date and a legal record started. But more than that, it meant Carol needed somewhere to live immediately because the court process, even though it would take a few weeks, made it clear she had no claim to the house. Clive told her she could stay with them. But Clive and Naomi's place is a 2-bedroom condo they downsized to after selling their old house 3 years ago. Carol in their space meant Naomi and Clive had zero privacy. Carol was stressed and fighting with both of them daily. And within a week, Naomi was calling Carol difficult to live with. The same woman who enabled Carol's attitude toward me was now dealing with it herself. But the real pressure came from something else. Remember those improvements I made to the house? I decided to sell. My lawyer confirmed I could list the property during the divorce proceedings since it was solely my asset. I put the house on the market, and because of every repair, every renovation, every single thing I'd done with my own hands that Carol mocked on Instagram, the house was valued at significantly more than what I owed. All that equity was mine. Carol was going to walk away from the divorce with nothing from that property, and she knew it. The house she'd laughed about me maintaining, the floor she'd filmed me crawling on while sick, the gutters she'd captioned, "Free labor." All of it had built value that she'd never touch. Carol called me 13 times in one day. Not spread out, 13 calls between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m. She left messages on several of them asking me to take the house off the market, saying we could work something out, saying she'd been wrong, and she knew it now. She said Clive was furious because he realized his down payment was about to become my profit and there was nothing he could do. She said Naomi wasn't speaking to her because the stress of Carol living with them was causing fights between Naomi and Clive. She said Alyssa had cut her off completely after the Daryl breakup and she had nobody left. Every single message was asking me to undo what I'd done. I didn't answer a single call. I let everyone go to voicemail. I listened to all of them, saved all of them, and forwarded them to my lawyer. Clive tried one more time. He came to the house, saw the for sale sign in the yard, and stood in my driveway asking me to reconsider. He said the $30,000 was supposed to help build his daughter's future, and I was cashing it out for myself. I told him his daughter had 4 years to treat me like a partner and instead she treated me like a joke. I told him the cockroach was selling the house and keeping every cent. The house sold 3 weeks later. I moved into an apartment closer to my job. Carol ended up renting a room from a coworker because she couldn't afford a full apartment. Clive and Naomi's relationship is strained because Naomi blames Clive for insisting Carol's name stay off the deed in the first place. Carol and I communicate only through lawyers now. She recorded me at my lowest and posted it for entertainment. She called me pathetic, desperate, a cockroach. She let her friends laugh at the man who kept her house running. And now that house paid me back for every hour I spent on my knees fixing things for someone who thought I was beneath her. She wanted to know what rock bottom looks like. Now she knows the cockroach was selling the house and keeping every cent. That might be the hardest thing anyone has ever said in a driveway. In the history of driveways, every breakup, every argument, every get off my property that has ever occurred on residential asphalt. This might be the single greatest line ever delivered on one. This man took the worst thing his wife ever called him. The word she used to dehumanize him while he was sick and on his knees serving her household. And he wore it like a crown in front of her father. He didn't yell it. He didn't scream it. He told him calmly standing next to a for sale sign on a property worth 6 figures more than when he bought it. That is not anger and that is not revenge. That is a man who processed every ounce of his pain, turned it into architecture, and built an exit out of it with permits. And Naomi, oh Naomi, the woman who said no decent man puts his wife on the street is now fighting with her own husband because Carol is insufferable to live with after 1 week. This man did 4 years. 4 years of being mocked, filmed, compared, belittled in group chats, treated like a utility bill with a pulse. He endured all of that while still fixing the sink, still cooking dinner, still showing up like a partner every day. Naomi couldn't survive the Carol experience for 7 days before she started cracking. That's not karma. That's a free trial. She got the demo version of what this man lived on a permanent subscription and she immediately wanted to cancel. You wanted him to eat this for the rest of his life. Naomi, you couldn't eat it for a week. And Clive in the driveway at the end. There's something almost tragic about it. Not tragic enough to feel sorry for him, but tragic in the way you can watch a man realize in real time that his own arrogance built every wall of the trap his daughter is sitting in. He kept Carol's name off the deed, his decision, his financial paranoia about student loans. And in doing so, he accidentally created the exact legal framework that let this man remove Carol with zero resistance. Clive was so busy protecting his $30,000 from Carol's creditors that he forgot to protect it from the man he thought was beneath his daughter. He played chess against himself for 4 years and didn't realize he was losing until he saw the for sale sign, the 13 calls. Each one of those voicemails is a little time capsule of a woman watching her entire life collapse in real time. Call 1 is probably still angry. By call 5, she's bargaining. By call 9, she's crying. By 13, she's begging. And every single one went to voicemail because this man let the phone ring the same way Carol stood in the hallway and let him crawl on wet tile with a fever. She watched him suffer and pulled out her camera. He watched her suffer and pulled out his lawyer. The difference is everything he did was legal, documented, and measured. He never posted her on social media. He never called her names. He never recorded her at her lowest and captioned it for laughs. He just quietly, methodically removed himself from a situation where he was being treated as less than human and let every consequence Carol had been dodging her entire life catch up to her all at once. You're watching Hidden Lies, where secrets don't stay buried. This story will make you question everything. Stay till the end.